All right, so welcome to the October meeting for AISC committee. I'm excited to see everybody today. We've got several things to share and discuss in getting ahead of seeing everybody in person at the November convening. So we're going to go ahead and get started with Kathy talking about our cross committee updates.
Hi, everyone. Just wanted to give you guys a couple of updates for the Bold New Futures. They have their policy group. I mentioned that the last time that we met. They are making recommendations on policies, and they met for the first time in August. They had their first meeting, and their recommendations are for funding for the visits to the L3s. How can those visits be funded? And then they were looking at updates to the Title II guidance, which is part 1, for the purpose of visiting the L3. So that's something that they're focused on. Additionally, looking at guidance on financial requests, how those would look if they should make requests for visiting the L3 groups. And their next phase is to do data collection as it relates to Portrait of a Learner. And you may have noticed, or it has been shared with us, that they got more responses than the first time that they had they sent out the survey. So this last time I have that they had 58 responses. So that's a good start. VLE is collecting information across the district in regards to what a vibrant learner might look like. And they're determining a bank of definitions that they might use when it comes to looking at what a vibrant learner is. And also what are some good practices in terms of developing a database as it relates to vibrant learning. I think those are all the updates that I have. If anyone else, if Susan, Andre, Jennifer, or Sarah, you guys have any updates from them, you can share them at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Anybody got any other updates if you've attended any of the other committee meetings?
Yeah, I'll just say a few words later about the systems bank, but I'll just wait until I get to that slot now, agenda.
Okay. So of course we are meeting in person next month, the 2nd and the 3rd. And so prior to that, we're going to talk today some about one of the presentations that we're going to make as the committee. Does anybody have any concerns about the Cool Council that are present on your mind that you want to bring up and add to our agenda discussion today? Well, there's obviously only a few of us here today, and that is one of the concerns that we, kind of identified in our last couple of meetings, is making sure that we're meeting at a time that works for people. So I do have the ability to share screen. I didn't think I did. There it goes. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up that slideshow. Let me see if I can find it. That the KDE has asked each of the committees to present out about the work that we've done with the council, for the council this year. And so that's what I'm going to be pulling up here. Get sharing. There we go. Okay, can everybody see that? Okay, looks like yes. Okay, yes. Good. So put this up that way. So kind of like a year 1 progress report, each one of the committees is going to be presenting this. And so this is a draft version. So I really wanted, Kathy and I really wanted to bring this to everybody today to get your feedback and contribution into what we are presenting to the council as a whole. We do have a new member joining us, Delaney from the Pritchard Committee. And so she will be joining us for the first time in November. And I've already reached out to her and welcomed her to the group. So we're excited to be getting some new blood. So the first couple of slides are kind of just a recap of everything that we've done for the last year. So our 2 6-month goals here, we're no longer calling those BHAGs, but our 2 6-month goals from November 2022 to April 2023, we were conducting local, national, and international information gathering via historical review, research, learning from local laboratories of learning and other districts, and understanding existing models, frameworks in order to generate a report on what works and what's not worked, and innovative approaches to assessment and accountability. And you all did some outstanding work and research on that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then starting in April, from our in-person meeting in April, we made a 6-month goal of defining and comparing multiple possible models for a future assessment and accountability system that consider the lessons learned from the previous 6 months goal and the report that we made from that, and meet our design principles. And that includes exploring those opportunities and trade-offs within local, state, and federal contexts. And I apologize for a lot of the background noise. I'm going to step to my door and shut my office door for just a second. There's just a lot of people in the lobby. Hold on.
While Sarah is doing that, does anyone have any other thoughts, or did we miss anything that we should have mentioned in terms of what our 6-month goals were? We tried to cover everything that we could think of, but you may have a different way of looking at it, and we'd love to hear your ideas.
One of the things that we pointed out was that we were working on some accountability redesign. So these are kind of the key points that we've covered over the last year, was summarizing those findings of our workstream groups, focus on learning how accountability and assessment has worked both in and out of Kentucky. We presented that work to the state board back in March of this past year. We created those design principles for accountability and assessment, and those are still, I don't want to say draft, but they're a living document. Those are things that we need to cycle back to on a regular basis. Is the work that we're doing meet this? Of our design principles, have we need to add something else in? We've looked at several different prototype models for accountability, including 3 different major differences in systems with local control, state centralized, and state controlled. And then we've explored those essential design features for the systems bank. So the 2 pieces that Kathy and I really wanted to get some impact from you all on, and I'd like to see this in the chat today, is what lessons have we learned over the course of the year from the 2 6-month goals that we've gone into. So I'm pulling up the chat here.
And you can drop those in the chat, or you can share them. If you don't want to talk out right now, you can just drop them in the chat. But we really want to include those lessons that we've learned. And no matter what, it covers everything that we've done, not just one thing, but everything from the goals we set, how we work together, our meetings, what lessons have we learned from those things. So we hope that you'll be forthwith in telling us what we can do, or what you'd like to see happen in the next year.
And those lessons can be things about process, or they can be things about issues as a whole. And thank you, Laura, for dropping both those goals in there. It does help to have what the goals actually are, because we didn't have that pulled up at the same time.
I'm just guessing that everyone is typing right now. Is that why there's no comments? I know there were a lot of lessons that Sarah and I learned, and we really want to know what the ones were that you learned. We learned that. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, this is Karen. I was just going to say, what if we reframed the question to what do we have to celebrate from the past year? Might that inspire some thought?
I think so.
I think we've gotten a lot accomplished, especially with regard to the first goal, I think that we got a lot of different research accomplished, and I would agree with we collaborate, that we were celebrating, we were collaborative. I think that I guess I've been trying to think about how to capture what I'm thinking, and that it's in some ways, what we've, I think, kind of decided, or at least I think what we're just, some of the things that people have been saying they want, it's a lot harder. I mean, we knew this was hard, but I think it's a lot harder when, I think what people really want are systems that are responsive to their needs, and everyone has different needs. So, you know, finding systems that are still equitable and making sure people don't fall between the cracks, but also a place for people to get to have some flexibility and role in what that looks like it's a really hard balance.
I would agree with that. Thank you, Suzanne. Anybody else? Brandy, I see that you popped in here in the chat about the amount of learning that we have because of our research and starting to define a vision of what we desire. Anything you want to elaborate on there, Brandy?
No, I'm good, but thank you.
Okay. Who is education from Kathy? You're coming up as education consulting. I was like, who is that? Yes, we can celebrate that we're collaborative. I was like, it's not reading your name for some reason. Anybody else? Kathy and I had a list, but we really didn't want to restrict your thinking, and so we're holding off on giving our thoughts on this to make sure that we're getting and representing your ideas, because that's our role as co-chairs, is to make sure that we're representing what you all think. Oh, well, I just popped it up there. Okay. So lessons that we've learned. And again, this is the draft, and I have to send it over to Karen Dodd by next week. So I want to make sure that this is accurate and what you all are thinking, and that we're all in agreement on this, because we will be presenting this to the council as a whole at the November convening. So the lessons that we've learned that Kathy and Susan and Andre and Jennifer and I came up with is that collaborative bit, working collectively, bring people together is challenging but rewarding. Diversity in backgrounds and expertise leads to stronger outcomes. We benefit from the vast experiences and knowledge of our members. We've learned deeply about the landscape of assessment and accountability, innovation here in Kentucky and beyond, both nationally and internationally. And that is in large part due to a lot of the experts that we have in this group. We value cross-committee collaboration. I know you all have talked a lot about wanting to know what the other committees are doing, and Kathy's been doing a phenomenal job of attending those meetings and then reporting out to us every month about what's going on. So we're all kept updated. Create a process for reviewing each stage of the work and keep it as up to date as you go. And then it takes time and effort to get everyone on the same page, but hearing everyone's voice strengthens collaboration. So looking at those things, I'm going to add in this bit about systems working together to create systems that are responsive to a variety of needs that Suzanne suggested.
I think that important that there was that it's a challenge, right? To create a system that's responsive to everyone's needs when everyone's needs are different. So maybe that's the lesson we've learned. Maybe it's also something we're grappling with.
And that we're starting to define that vision. And I know we've got several people that are not on this Zoom today, so I will be sending this out for feedback from the committee before I submit it over to Karen Dodd at KDE for accessibility approval and final approval to get to the convening. So I do want to make sure that we get reach as many people as possible. Anybody else? Does that jog anybody else to say something? Go ahead.
Oh, that was just me, Sarah. I was going to say, as you're thinking about this and you see what we've written, if there's something that you want to drop into the chat to say we might need to change something or add more things, go right ahead. We're going to keep the chat open for this opportunity for the entire meeting.
Okay, so then the other section, and like Kathy said, if you think of something, drop it in the chat. So what are some things and that you think we as a committee have grappled with, and that maybe we still are grappling with? And that's a drop it in the chat or turn your mic on and feel free to share with the rest of us.
I think something that seems to be a consistent thread, something I hear us talk through and grapple with is this, I don't know, it seems like there can be some tension between meeting students like kind of basic educational needs and the idea of things that are outlined in a portrait of a learner or in a more innovative or deeper learning space. I think that there's tension in those conversations sometimes between those two ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Suzanne.
I think we've had a lot of thoughts from the beginning, and we think about what exactly do we mean by the accountability? What's the structure and framework with which we're working in? Not only where we want to go, but are there some common understandings in order for us to move forward? So what might those be, and what do we think? And I know you've been spending a lot of time on that, but I think that's something we've grappled with and probably will for a while until we come up with our final areas. I think it's always, when you have something of this magnitude, that it's very difficult to move right in on it. I think you just, sometimes when I sit and think about what we're doing, and I think about past and what we did in the past and what all that meant, it is really, I'm not going to say challenging, but it really does make you step back and think about the importance of this work. And sometimes that can freeze you. Sometimes if you think about magnitude, it can freeze you in your thinking, so not want to make a mistake. And I think in trying to get common understandings of where all the committees are going and what they're all thinking, and how do you balance all of that so that we're not going in 3 different directions, but one direction in 3 different perspectives, but purposes. So I think I know that's been a challenge and reflection for me as we've done the work, and I think it probably it's something that will still stay with it for a while. We're still very young in this, and deciding as much work has been done. It's a lofty goal that we have. It's also very challenging. So I think we have to realize that, but move it forward. And I'm glad to hear that we have someone new coming on. I think getting new blood will also help us analyze what we're doing and thinking about it and see where we may go with it. That's all.
Thank you, Betty.
Thank you,
Y'all
Betty.
have done quite a bit there. And I think that's been a question for a lot of people about, you know, how can we develop that common understanding of what this really means? And how can we turn a vision for what we want into a reality? Because I feel like that's been the biggest struggle about, well, we can't do that, or that doesn't meet federal guidelines, or how could we train teachers on how to assess this way, or etc. And so Laura's pointing out, yes, I agree with that, Laura. Thank you. So grappling doesn't reflect any shortcoming. We should be grappling and grapple through the work, and it is complex stuff. And I know I really appreciate you all sticking it out this year, because it's hard, and it's down in the trenches of the work, to use a majorly overused metaphor, but of really trying to think about what's best for students in Kentucky now and in the future, and then also still going through, for a lot of us, still going through the current accountability system as well, and trying to keep on top of that. Anything else somebody want to add?
Well, since Betty is on the call, this is Andre, I will say, and Betty, please correct me if you disagree with this, but I feel like we've been talking several times about the tough challenge of trying to make sure that the learnings we've had as individual members, either historically or through the research that was done, that gets acted upon in any kind of meaningful way, right? That it doesn't just sort of like die on a shelf because it's written in a report. And I think that's something that definitely keeps us in the committee as leaders up at night, so to speak. We talk about that a lot, about like how we can make sure and bring that back and weave that back into the process at appropriate times. Would you still agree with that, Betty? I know that you brought that up, I think, a few times in the past. Does that still resonate with you, that challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I think it would be foolish on our part, and I'm not sure how I want to say it. Foolish is a word probably you don't want to use. I encourage us really to think about and to examine what we did in the past, and there were so many strong aspects of that. And yes, there were issues, so you need to know both sides, what went really well and what didn't, so that you can weave that pathway between keeping or reinforcing or bringing back some things that were very strong while avoiding those issues that perhaps caused problems. Because the goal 30 years ago is the same goal we're dealing with right now. So we really haven't changed that end goal of what we want. And there was so much done then that I think if as much as we can analyze, I don't want to get stuck in the past. I don't want to get stuck in the past by any stretch of imagination. I just want to make sure, Andre, as you said, that we don't forget that we don't just do a report and shelve it, we've done that, and move on and think about something else. I think we consider that along with everything else that we've learned. And I feel a need for, I don't know, more of a framework of where we're going, what we're doing, some aspects of that. Maybe that's just me at this stage of feeling that. But I do think there's a lot there for us to go on, and I think there's a lot more that we're learning. And the challenges are many, because the challenges are going from the purpose for the assessment, accountability, and the structure for that, and who benefits, because that changes what you're going to do if you don't have a strong understanding of what that's going to be like. And I know we heard, even I guess it was at our April meeting, we heard the concerns that people had about no accountability for students and the negative impact that have had. I think we've heard a lot of things that we can't afford to lose, and some of them were good things that we did, and some things are things we've learned because of that we can't afford to forget that and to deal with that, because that is an issue. It was an issue then, it's an issue now. And also I think we have to deal with the issues of and I know there's a lot of value in having accountability at the district level and the school level, but it's how does that all fit together? You know, and you all probably heard this, because this has to go back 15 years, 40 years. It's that when I was working in district, that we constantly had said that we're a school district, not a district of schools. It's not just individuals. There's a broader component that we feel there's a value there of that we want to work in that. So that's part of it, is how do we have this total outline and vision and template of what we want. And then it's not that we don't want to do with variations in that, but we do, but how does that fit within this? So it's having that understanding, okay, this is what we agree with. Now, where is the flexibility within that system? And what are the requirements, no matter what the flexibility or wherever the requirements could go? And I know I'm just talking. But back to Andre, yes, I agree. I think we have to think about what we've heard, what we've learned, what we've experienced, and learn from the good and bad, and make sure that we're using that and not just starting completely over again.
You brought to mind some of when we heard from Fleming County at the April meeting, and how they are an L3 district and building their own accountability system, so to speak, their district local one, and how they are constantly revising it. Like even this year, they've pulled out another revision where they're going in and tweaking and making it better in different aspects. And so what you were saying there, Betty, made me really think about, we don't have to get this perfect right out of the gate. It's not going to be perfect right out of the gate. It's just we're going to have to come to some point where we actually start, and that we're going to be able to look at what worked and what didn't work and constantly come back to it rather than just go, well, that didn't work, and throw it all out. So appreciate that a lot. And then Kathy's saying, about grappling with understanding what the L3 committees were doing and how what we're doing will impact their work. And I agree with that, because even the L3s are all kind of different. They're not all doing the same thing. And Cheryl is saying how we honor those processes, those that are already in the work. And I would agree with that too. That was a question that I raised of how, if we come out with a new accountability system and it goes completely against what the L3s are doing, are they going to continue to do their stuff? Or are they going to throw it completely out? They spend a lot of time with their community working on that. How are we going to honor that work?
And Cheryl, can I ask you, that's how I had understood what you said as well, what Sarah sort of re-articulated there, that it was essentially about honoring the work of what people are doing locally in districts or schools already. Is that what you had meant, or is there maybe a different or an additional meaning to what you wanted to say here that we didn't yet get?
No, that's what I meant. I know there are lots of districts who are trying to honor and value those students who are being more innovative in their learning. And I know it would be disheartening for those districts that are in the work, or for those students even, for us to throw the baby out with the bathwater, that sort of situation. So but bringing what they're already doing into the fold, if you will, of the state's guidelines, I think. How can we mesh it enough to make it work for everyone, but then not keep it so pinpointed that it loses the value of that innovation?
Right. And that also connects to what Brandy is saying here. Brandy, when I read this, it similarly makes me think, this challenge that we have, which is this is more like a process challenge, but to keep track of all the different initiatives and efforts and collaborations that are already going on, right? So you're working with benefits-based accountability and you're doing meaningful accountability work. I'm sure there's other districts that are doing that. Kentucky has various initiatives that Sarah Snipes is overseeing. She's doing a great job at that. But this idea of making sure that there's at least some mid-level to high-level sense of this ecosystem of efforts in this state that have to be understood in order to make sure that any new design efforts sort of fit and don't corrupt those valuable local efforts is not an easy task. And I think it's a lot about information, organization, communication, and finding the right kind of structures for those. So I know we are thinking about that a lot. Brandy, if you wanted to add anything to what you wrote, feel free to do so. And
No,
thanks.
I was just agreeing when we were talking about Fleming. Our superintendent was a principal in Fleming, and so he's very familiar with what they're doing there. And so we're doing very similar. The only difference is theirs is very district, and we're doing district and then schools. So that's like an extra layer to that.
Okay, so as I said earlier, and we're going to send this out. So if you think of something later, feel free to email it to us, because I know we're asking you on the spot and it's the end of a long day too. This is the list that we came up with. And we kind of divided it into both strategic issues and then process issues. And I've heard several of you share kind of things that fit into each component here today. So what's the most productive pathway? Differentiating views on the priority for accountability and assessment. Defining the essential features that we want to lift up in a system of systems design. And then the process issues, going back to the L3, full knowledge, understanding of what they're doing, which several of you mentioned as well. Consistent uses and understanding the terminology for accountability and assessment, which Betty, you pointed out earlier, that we need to come up with that definition of what do we actually mean for that. And then how can we improve communication and work organization so that committee members stay engaged? And that, I think, is one that the council as a whole is grappling with, is continuing to engage the members of the council. Anybody think of anything that maybe a thought just based off our list? And I'll go back through and add some of these in that you all mentioned before I send it back out to everybody. Well, I appreciate you guys talking over that with us today. Let's stop sharing my screen here. And we are going to move on then in the agenda. And if you think of something, feel free to drop it in the chat. I will get all the notes off of that later and kind of condense those into some bullets on our presentation. And then I will send it out to the entire committee, since we have several people that aren't here today, just to get their feedback before we submit it over to KDE. But we're going to go ahead and move on then in our agenda. Susan's going to talk to us some more about system of systems prototyping. So Susan, we're ready whenever you are.
Excuse me. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you all. So here we are in the muck working on our system design, figuring out how do we understand the structures that we're working within and come forth ultimately with an idea for the design of a future assessment and for accountability system in Kentucky. So I've got a few slides to orient us to today's conversation. Not all of us were here last month, so I'll also provide sort of a bit of a reminder of where we left off in this conversation at our September meeting. And so, so here we are. Sarah just in her presentation did a lovely job describing how we got here, but here we are discussing, possible ideas for the future of assessment and accountability here in Kentucky. What do we, as the Accelerating Innovation Standing Committee, put forth as possible design options for us to consider? In reflecting on last month's conversation in our facilitators group, Andre and I sort of figured out that we're sort of talking at sometimes different levels of system design. And so this schematic was really helpful for us individually in thinking about how do we work through the different components of system design, or even what are the different layers. And so we figured we'd share it with you all. We have the overall system aspirations, and those are what we see sort of as articulated in the Kentucky United We Learn report. Hopefully in November, the Cool Council will be working on agreeing on sort of a moonshot. What is our sort of directional, long-term, ambitious goal? And Betty, I think you're certainly, as Sarah and Jennifer acknowledged in the chat, you are not the only one that's sort of feeling like, okay, where are we in all of this? Where are we going? And I think all of us on the planning team and in the other committees are sort of grappling with the same issue. Like, let's land on a council-wide long-term moonshot to help orient all of our work, so we make sure the three committees are rowing in the same direction. And so that is sort of going to help us with our North Star, our system aspiration. As a committee, we then have our design principles. These are also really high level. They're super important because they articulate our values, but they're also not very informative for making any sort of particular design decision. Where they will be really helpful is when we actually have a design potential or multiple possible designs. Then we can go sort of evaluate the quality of those possible ideas against our design principles, right? We can be, when we have a design for a future system in mind, we can then pull it up and look at it from each of those angles. For example, how does this design center the needs of marginalized students in a way that our current assessment and accounting system may or may not be doing, right? And so the design principles will be a very helpful evaluative framework. And as was said earlier, there's something we sort of will hopefully come back to throughout the design process as we iterate. What we sort of jumped to in our September meeting was our operational component. We sort of put out, Jennifer and I put out two possible ideas, a system idea around assessment and a system idea around accountability, saying like, here are some things where all the components are already worked out. We're telling you what the grade levels will be. We'll tell you what the subject areas will be. We'll tell you how to weight into the accountability system and just see how that landed. And I think in reflecting as a team on that conversation, we realized kind of we missed a crucial step in there. We missed a layer. We went too quickly from the design principles down straight into the operational components. How does it interact with the law? How does it interact with our current system? That kind of stuff. What we didn't really spend time discussing, and where we now hope we can bring the conversation today, is talking about those essential features. What are the essential features of a future assessment or accountability system in the state that are sort of non-negotiable for our committee? These will help serve as productive anchors for system design. Then we can go design the possible system ideas. So just to remind you all, here's our design principles. We have those. I'm going to show you the design ideas that Jennifer and I shared last time. One around localizing assessment, where we have interdisciplinary sort of local defenses of learning in grades 5, grade 8. Right, so this was sort of Jennifer and I said, yes, defenses of learning, that's something we've talked about. That's something that makes sense that the Department of Education is talking about. Let's flip this up for our committee so we have productive discussion around it. When really this idea of interdisciplinary defenses of learning came out of some of the prototyping conversations, yes, but wasn't previously identified by the committee as, yes, that's something we need. That would very well might be an essential feature, but we sort of had a hunch that it might be, but it wasn't sort of a discussion that we've had, and we got too quickly then into the nitty-gritty. Similarly, the second idea we proposed or discussed last month was about localizing accountability, right? How might we bring local evidence of student success into our formal state accountability system? And we did that by sort of proposing an expanded elementary and middle school accountability system, along with sort of redefining what post-secondary readiness might mean in our high school accountability system through sort of this menu of options. So we got really operational really quickly with those conversations, and we sort of are hoping today we can scale back one layer and just talk about those essential features. So what is it from the perspective of the Accelerating Innovation Standing Committee that might serve as a productive anchor for our system design? What are those essential features that we want to see? Maybe it is those student defenses of learning. And I've heard some of you say that, but maybe it's not. Maybe we're really resonating more towards performance-based assessment, or maybe it's the portrait of a learner, or maybe it's really not any particular format of assessment, and it's just reducing the statewide assessment footprint. And that's what we want our anchor to be. But I'd love for us to just sort of engage in a dialogue here about what is it that sort of ignites us and unites us as a committee, so that we can then move forth into system design confidently, that we're sort of representing the big ideas that we want to make sure we feel good, or that we all can get on the same page about. So I'll stop talking and opening it up to clarifying questions, and then also just discussion. You know, what do you see as our drivers here? So I'll put a question another way. If we were to move forward with system accountability design or assessment design in the state, what must it include? What must be sort of the essential driving feature around which we design? Is it that, yes, we really do want to call back to the portrait of a learner, be it the state portrait, or the local portraits, and we need to be incorporating those skills in some way. What is it? Maybe it's not the portrait of a learner. Is there something else? And it doesn't, you can just be speaking for you. You don't have to speak for anybody else. You can just speak for you.
You could also often offer an alternative, which is if there were something in this, could you imagine something in the system that would really get you up in arms? So, you know, on the one hand, Susan's like, what's non-negotiable that you would really want to see? There might also be something that if it became present, you'd say, wait, no, that is contrary to our principles. That's contrary to the work we're trying to do. That would work against us. And you might have had experience with some things like that. And so you might have some background that would inform that such a reaction.
Brandy, can I ask you, when you say, I think the portrait of a learner is essential, right? What does that mean to you?
So I think if that's the expectation that we have for our students to graduate with in our state, then I think some form of accountability has to be part of that, whether that be in addition to what we already have established as a state, or if that's supplementing part of that as well. Maybe that's post-secondary readiness that it's added to. But I think having it as part of that is important.
So for you, for example, would that mean that defenses of learning in marker grades, like Susan and Jennifer had, for example, proposed last time, are sort of like a must-have as a result? Or are they like a nice-to-have, or are there things where you go like, you know, I think it's good to target the development of those competencies, but I would not be comfortable having that formalized in the accountability system, whatever the nuances and details are?
I think a must-have, personally. That's just my personal opinion.
Yeah. Okay.
Betty, I see you came off mute.
What?
Oh, I just see you came off mute. Does that mean you've got something to share?
Can you go back to the previous slide, please? Yeah, I'm just wondering, and you're all thinking when you came up with these question marks, why is an essential feature a reduction of mandated state testing? Not saying it shouldn't be, it's just the wording. I think everything else we want to do for that one area, we want to reduce it. So what was the thinking in wording it that way? Because it's not like a reduction of performance task or a reduction of less attention to local assessment. That's the only one where you're talking about. It's just the structure makes you think, how can you see reduction as an essential feature? So I'm just wondering what you all were thinking when you worded it that
structure there, Betty. Yeah, I think maybe it's just seen as what's the galvanizing force? And you can see how, you know, when you read the tenor of some of the comments captured in the United We Learn report, it becomes pretty apparent that sort of the feeling that the footprint of mandated standardized testing is too taking up too much oxygen in the local district sort of conversation around assessment and what's meaningful for students and their learning. And so I think a possible sort of just focusing on reducing that state footprint could be a possible galvanizing force. I think, you know, you're right, this doesn't really follow the same structure as the others, but it might be sort of the lowest common denominator that folks feel like they can all agree with. But maybe it's not. Maybe it's one of the other things.
I don't know, maybe you also want a balanced system that pulls these together. So maybe that's equalize all these, combine all these together. If you're thinking all of those are important, so maybe you're really looking at it as a balance system, and maybe it's the degree of balance, and where the balance goes comes part of the structure that we're looking for.
So that idea speaks to me a lot. So I think that, like, I don't know if there's a way And I also like the idea of providing, I don't know, when Brandy put local accountability is important as well. Like, to me, it's also sort of this local choice. Because I think people might be in different places. Well, they are in different places and have different probably priorities, and that you could maybe go, I don't know, I'm throwing out a hypothetical operation, which I guess we're not really supposed to be thinking about operationally, but like that you might be able to go further in one direction. Like I want to opt into more performance tasks and opt out of more of whatever the current system is if it stays the same. Or I might want to opt into backpack skills and not do, like I might have kids do the backpack skills for their portrait of a learner rather than defenses. And like, giving them some choices as how they, I might want to have my own district portrait of a learner rather than use the state portrait of a learner. And if I'm using my own district one, I don't know, it would be hard for the state to have a one size fits all way of measuring some of those things, I would imagine. So I think what both Betty and Brandy are saying is speaking to me in a way that, like, I think there's a way to make it all come together and maybe also provide some options at the same time.
And that's a good point. I definitely think there's absolutely a way for it to happen, or this conversation probably should never have started if we didn't think we were going to come up with this. But one thing that I guess I would want to see as an essential feature is going to be equity. Because some of you come from very strong districts who are really pushing ahead. Others aren't. I mean, quite honestly, that's the reason CARE started 30 some years ago. Started this funding, but the basis wasn't the funding, it was the equity and the education. And so some districts, because it can be easier to do it one way than another. And I don't want to say anything negative about anyone or any district, because I don't know that, but I'm just saying, I think we're here and we are in the defense of students and their learning. Assessment accountability is a structure to ensure that our students learn and are provided and capable to move forward in their lives. And that strength of that and the depth of that should not vary from district to district. It may look a little bit different, but the equity and the strength should be there. And that's a challenge to figure out how you're going to do that. So I guess if we're talking about challenges, to me, that is a great challenge, because I know I know that we're going to go to districts different, and I don't have a problem with that. I just want to make sure that it's the equity in learning and the equity assessment and support is there. And that is a tough thing to do. So that's one thing we're really going to have to think about. How do we create that so that students who are doing really great things in their demonstrations of learning or work that one district is doing that's really strong, that students in every district has that same opportunity of that strength of their learning. We can't afford not to be adamant about that in the structure. I don't know what it looks like though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you landed on sort of a central tension of this work, right? How do we really, truly allow and engage in an exercise of local autonomy and choice, and while also sort of maintaining strong frameworks for quality and comparability at the state level?
I agree with that thought fully. I also, and this may not be the place to put it, but I really liked what Betty talked about with a balance system. I think about there is a time and a place for multiple choice assessments. And, I know our district uses iReady and some different benchmarks. And so I really do like that thought of it being balanced, because I don't think that those things should go away. There's still a place for them. But I think it's a balance.
Yeah, and that gets also to the point of different students or different student groups having really different kinds of needs, even within the same grade in the same classroom. And I think this challenge also that people I think speak to when it comes to mandated statewide testing, I think often implicitly in that is this notion of, testing that is irrelevant to me or feels irrelevant to me at the classroom level or at the school level, right? Like reducing that part of the footprint. I think many people are actually fine with what you were saying, Brandy. Like if you buy into a curriculum model like iReady or products from Renaissance, and you feel like, yeah, students are engaging a lot with tasks and getting feedback, and that's a kind of a form of ongoing assessment, like that often doesn't bother people, right? Because they feel like it's instructionally meaningful and actionable, and it reduces the burden for the teachers. And I think with the problem is, of course, always that we have these competing also roles and responsibilities, right? Teachers and school leaders predominantly, they need actionable day-to-day kind of information along with some like historical trends. And if you get to the district and the state level, you need that too, but you need it at a very different level of aggregation and for different kinds of purposes. And so that's always going to be to some degree in conflict. So I think how to reconcile that to the degree that's even possible, or to live with a balance that gives sort of enough room to both sides to honor sort of the competing needs is going to be really an important challenge, an important issue to wrestle with,
I think you're bringing up a really good point, Andre, about the actionability of the data that we're getting from the testing system, because I think that was the key component to me in really being interested in the Cool Council, was wanting to design a system that worked for the students this year, not a system that is just reporting out on how the district is doing or how the school is doing, but something that is actually going to be put into place for students now, the ones that are sitting in the seats in front of the teachers now, versus taking that once a year state assessment when you don't get the results until the following school year.
Yeah, and I think you see that now nationally, where the counterpart of this is the through-year testing movement, so which is sort of this build-up of the interim assessment movements, and this idea that where people try to thread the needle there to sort of say like, oh yeah, we can do multiple assessments in a year, and we can both give a summative determination at the end, or we can quote unquote make that instructionally useful when we do it within the year by aligning that with curricula to the degree that we can, or making it at least curriculum relevant. And the reality is it's very, very, very hard whenever that comes from outside, unless you go with a like deeply curricula embedded program like iReady and Renaissance and those kinds of providers. And, without going into the details of which one's strong or weaker, but that idea, that's just a very different model. Yeah.
So I'm hearing three things that I'll take away from this conversation. So I'm just going to say back to you all what I heard, and please correct me or elaborate. So the first is the portrait of a learner is an essential feature for our system, that whatever we do should sort of be in alignment with or in service to advancing the skills articulated in either the statewide or local portraits of a learner. That we value local choice based on the local context, right? Some districts are much further ahead in their competency-based education journeys. Other districts are further behind. Some are doing backpacks, some are doing defenses. Districts are in different places and on different journeys. And so we sort of need to design in a system that can account for that local variability. And that I'm hearing loud and clear, probably the most consensus around this idea is that whatever we do really needs to be focused on sort of this balanced system, where we're balancing the idea of sort of ensuring equity and opportunity to learn, that there is a time and a place for statewide standardized assessment, With also on the other end of that balance is sort of valuing local innovation and making sure that whatever our system design is sort of supportive of that local innovation, and then balancing that with the state's role in sort of ensuring equity and quality for all. How did I do in capturing sort of what I saw as the three big ideas coming out of this conversation? Where did I get it wrong, or where do you disagree?
I still think I think you've captured all the discussions. I think that we're definitely valuing the district work. My concern is for those who aren't doing the aggressive district work, that the system is created so those students have the saying that just because you're in one great district doesn't mean you get a better education and better stuff than someone else. Again, that goes back 30 years and what we tried to get away from. And so I think we have to be very, and I don't have an answer, but I think it's something we really have to work on how do you do that. It's not fair to students if we don't do that.
And so, Betty, would that run counter to that second point around local choice? And that really, if we're designing a system that sort of allows for the incorporation of performance tasks, that really all students should be engaging in those performance tasks. It shouldn't just be the districts that opt into them.
I'm not sure how you create a system of accountability in which all students aren't experiencing some of the same thing. I don't know how you do that. I don't know. So that is part of my concern, and that I want to value the work that the districts are doing. I just want to make sure that what do you do about in those districts where that isn't happening? So how do you create an equitable accountability system if it's inequitable?
Yeah, I think that gets also to the boundaries of what a system can do, right? Often I think we are asking too much of something by itself, whether it's even of school by itself, but also like an accountability system by itself. So if we consider accountability system as sort of in the narrow sense, just the, computation and the collection of evidence to understand where students in schools in particular are and which schools need additional support, then it's really about the programs around that, right? That the state is offering, and that gets sort of diffused through communities of practices and innovation initiatives and all of that. So I think, right? So like if you have schools that are underperforming, you can have really valuable programs and valuable initiatives that really help them make progress if you can identify them well and if you support them well. And that might make the system, quote unquote, be really a stronger system, so to speak. Or do you
This might be one of those places where we really had that strong discussion with vibrant learning, because that's also a critical aspect. And how do you balance that and the assessment accountability, which is the assessment to see that all students are getting their vibrant learning. So we can't do this alone, and they can't do that alone. So how is it that you structure so that you are carefully examining all of that, so that you are creating a system that is best for all students?
We have a little time, and I don't think, Betty, you were here last month. I think one of the ideas that was surfaced last time was this idea of adding in this readiness indicator. And this is where there would be a menu of options for districts that aren't engaging in backpacks of skills or defenses of learning. They could just choose to use their standardized assessment scores as part of this indicator, where other districts who are leaning into sort of really fully developing their own local portraits of the learner and the learning that goes along with that would be able to sort of that evidence would be valued and captured in this additional indicator. So it creates a system where not everybody is having the same assessment experience, depending on which district you're in, your district might just be choosing the state test for this indicator versus a different district might be further along in developing their local assessment system towards their local portrait of a learner. So that's just more of a clarifying comment. You know, I wanted to bring this to your attention just to see how it fits with you. Is this really not going to give us the equity check that we need? And do we really need to be thinking of something like this, which is not Kira, but it's more similar to Kira, where all students are sort of engaging in a similar assessment experience as part of the Title I assessment program? We're sort of designing tasks that are aligned with the portrait of a learner at key grade level, and all students, no matter which district you're in, are taking them. So not asking you to comment on the specifics of these designs in particular, but more just the conceptual differences between them, where this one, all students are engaging in the same assessment experience, and this one really does lean into that local choice. And this is not just for Betty, but this is for everyone. I think this is an important conversation for our committee to lean into and get clarity on.
And I think that's an important, hearing you guys discuss this a little bit more, I'm thinking about what about just for districts that choose to do that state accountability, that minuscule amount. When we're looking at this work, what if they stay there? What if they never choose to continue that work? And I think that goes back to what Betty was saying. We can have choice, but if it's a choice to opt out, I'm not sure if that will get us to this vibrant learning experience that we want for all of our students. As a district, we really don't have, as my personal district that I work in, we aren't really using that portrait of a learner. That's not something that our district has bought into just yet. We have portraits of a graduate that we kind of talk about, and we have the college and career readiness things that we're working through. But for our students that are coming from pre-K on through, I want to make sure that we are also keeping a good eye on their progression as well. So with the readiness, is that specifically just with the grade levels that are currently tested, or do you all envision readiness as my primary experience as a student was vibrant as well? So I guess that's kind of my two caveats there that I was thinking about.
So this indicator would be for middle and high school. So what evidence of learning around the either statewide portrait of a learner or the local portrait of a learner or graduate are students able to demonstrate through sort of a district system that would have, you know, state determined quality control parameters around it. So for example, we would require that, you know, the scores are audited in some way by multiple people. It's not just one person who is scoring any individual student's work, right? And so that readiness indicator would really be a menu of options. So to Cheryl's central point there, which I think was, if a district never wanted to opt in to doing a portrait of a learner and doing sort of these richer demonstrations of learning, they wouldn't have to. They could just use their statewide standardized assessment scores for that indicator. Are we comfortable?
So let me not say,
it sounds like maybe we're not.
Okay, so it isn't Halloween yet, so not let me say something that's too scary. To me, readiness does not feel as rich as portrait as a learner. And so can we ensure that we create a system that is loss protected, that parents can't say and say, y'all are accepting this for one district, mine doesn't do it, you're not requiring them. And so that's inequitable education, and there we go with another lawsuit. So that's my Halloween thought for you. I think we just have to think about that. As much as I hate to think about it, well, I don't know if I hate it or not. I want to make sure that it's equitable students, but I do think we have to think about that. I think this is a more difficult thing to do than you realize. I think what we did under Kara was much easier than this because there was that consistency across, and now we're talking about putting in variabilities, and with variabilities come challenges. So we're going to have to think about that Happy Halloween. That's all I got to say.
I wonder sometimes, I think about it like the minimum requirements for graduating high school that the state publishes and how there's variability in that across the state. For example, my own children attend where Algebra 2 is mandatory for high school graduation, but the district that I work in, it's not. And that's board policy.
That's not state mandate, though, that's district.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. If we made this a state mandate system where you've got that readiness component in there, I think we could set minimum guidelines for what constituted that. That's how I'm kind of working around in my head, because I see what you're saying about how if I'm transferring from one district to another and they're saying readiness is this and the next district is saying readiness is that, how that would be an equity issue.
And opportunities for demonstration of learning to me is also, because we all learn and demonstrate differently.
So I think it's really the key question. Are we comfortable as a committee in designing a state system that allows for that sort of local variation?
I don't know if it's are we comfortable, it's how do we do it, that it's equitable. It's not whether we do it, it's how do we do it.
Okay. Okay.
So I'm not saying let's not do it. I'm saying, because I think the district, if we found value, if we know there is value in that, then how do we do it equitably?
And maybe there's a way, I don't know. Part of the reason I brought up the issue is because I feel like that's what we've heard so much from these districts doing it, is they want to be able to have some choice. Maybe there's a way to have a balanced enough system that everyone's happy enough with it, that you don't have to have as much choice. And there could be pieces that the district does on top of that that doesn't count in this state system, but it's just, I mean, because like my district does a lot of these, well, not all of them, but does some of these things now, and it doesn't count at all, but they do it anyways.
I'm sure there's a way to do it. I'm just saying we have to think about that and come up with what it is that way. I don't think it's an undoable thing. I don't have an answer on how it is doable, but I'm just saying that's something that districts value, something we find is valuable, then we need to find a way that can be done equitably.
Well, this feels like huge progress to me. Oh, sorry. Go, Andre. I was going to just pass it to you to your next agenda.
I was just going to say, I think one of the things that we are discussing in our committee often is this notion of, in the abstract, to some degree, it's good to have these kinds of conversations, right? And sort of like get the boundaries of the system clarified. And that's why we wanted to do this. But at the end of the day, when it comes sort of to the nuances, you got to build something to really figure this out, like really spec it out, get people's reaction to this. And I also think I think we are all, not all, but I think there is a lot of variability in meaning and understandings around some of these concepts. So for example, Cheryl, when you were saying earlier that in your district, you are not aligned with a portrait of a learner, right? But you said then right after, but we are having a portrait of a graduate and we are doing other kinds of things. The question to me is, so what does it mean to you in your head and in amongst your colleagues to say, we are aligning ourselves with the portrait of a learner? Is it about, for example, making sure that the competencies that you're targeting are aligned with the ones that the state is proposing in some way? Is it about doing it consistently across certain grade bands, sort of like starting in elementary or upper elementary into middle school? Is it about having certain kinds of events like defenses of learning in particular grades? So there's, I think the language that we're using when we're saying we're doing something more or less or yes and no, and I think we all need to still learn to just sort of talk about what we are comfortable with and then understand what it can mean to align practices and assessment and accountability methods to a portrait of a learner, what the different variations of that are. So I feel like that's a challenge, and the only way we're doing this is by having people like you like talk about what it is, what that means in your district, and what the exact specifics are, and where the sort of like the boundaries or region of discomfort are. So I just wanted to mention that quickly.
This has been super helpful. Thank you all for engaging so thoughtfully in this discussion. We all have our notes and the chat, and we will come back in November in person to continue grappling in the muck together. So thank you for engaging. I will pass it over to Andre now, who will get us up to date on the systems bank work.
Okay, great. All right, everybody, I want to do a quick reminder of something, and then I wanted to check in with you about a task that we have been talking about and seeing whether this would work for you today, especially given that you're a relatively small number of people. So the first thing that I wanted to do is I want to quickly share something with you. So I wanted to remind you all, in case you weren't here last time, or maybe it has been a while since you looked at this. So there is this document that we have created around the Systems Bank Design Brainstorm. You may remember that there was this activity 2 meetings ago where you had been asked to think about different users and user profiles of what it might mean to have a bank that contains information that is valuable. And you may remember that I said something like, when you then did that, I synthesized this into this document, and the themes that came out of this was essentially that it was very natural for you all to think about both technological like databases or banks on the one hand that contain actual data, but also like resource spaces on the other hand. And so if you want to refresh yourself, your memory, and add additional comments to this, feel free to take this document here and read through this at a moment and give us additional like insight or information. So you can see here, this is the table of contents, and we had here listed out the different purposes of the bank, what kind of information might go into the bank, what features should it have, how might it be maintained over time, who should be involved, and what are some other considerations that you have. And again, this is not a single use case soup to nuts. This is more like the buffet style of saying, this could be useful to district administrators, school leaders and support teams, teachers, etc., if there was certain kind of information in it. And so just maybe read through that at some point and see whether this gives you any other kind of ideas, things you want to mention to us. That document still exists. It's sitting in today's folder. It's also in last week's folder, and it's also in the Systems Bank folder. So I know it's in 3 places. I did that today because I wanted for you to make sure that if you go into the virtual meetings folder for today, you can find it. So I would say today, just go, if you want to look at it again, go to the meeting folder for today. But I can also like reconcile it. I'll watch for comments. So I wanted to remind you of that. The second thing I wanted to also mention is that the Vibrant Learning Experiences Committee has actually been giving the same task to their members, and they have started to brainstorm also about what it would mean to have a resource space and a database for vibrant learning experiences. And what came out for them was this idea, similar to what you were mentioning today, that, yeah, it is important to clarify what we really mean by these key terms. So they had a discussion where they were talking about, what do we mean by vibrant learning experiences? What is it in the classroom? How do we know it when we see it? How might we develop it further? How might we evaluate it? And then what does that mean for us wanting to capture best practices, similar to what's now in this internal KDE database? So they're wrestling with that. And to this point about like bridge building, we are at this place now where we are trying to have regular meetings across the VLE and our committee around some of these critical things that we are moving forward, both the Systems Bank prototyping and the sorry, not Systems Bank, the system prototyping and ideating and the Systems Bank design, because we all recognize that this has to go together, and we just have to sort of connect our thinking and our development work more clearly and learn from one another. So there's going to be more and more efforts toward that extent, and we'll bring that back to you as we're learning more from one another. To this end, I want to show you two documents in just a second. But before I do this, I want to take a quick temperature from you all. So I know you're in different places. So some of you are maybe driving, some of you may be walking, some of you may be in front of the office computer. Can you please give me a quick signal via putting in the number 1, 2, or 3 in the chat? And I'll tell you what the 1, 2, and 3 is. So I have two documents where I would actually love for you to spend 5 to 10 minutes scanning them and doing a small task for each. But if this is really, really awkward for you right now, you'd rather do this sort of offline after the meeting, tomorrow, whatever, then we will not do it. I will just walk you through the documents. But if you feel like you're in a place where you can actually, spend a few minutes, if I give you instructions, and actually look at a document and put in a few thoughts, then let us know. So number 1 is, it's really not possible for me right now. This is not I'm either not in a good headspace, I'm not in a good place. 2 is, either way is fine. And 3 is, no, this would be great. I'd love to actually spend some time working on this. Do you mind telling me 1, 2, 3? So 1 is, really hate it, doesn't work. 2 is either way, and 3 is just kind of checking. And Paul, thanks for sharing that point. Okay, so I'm getting a bunch of 2s and a 3 and a 1. Okay. Oh, no, I'm getting some 1s. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4 1s, 2, 3 2s, and a 3. So, right. So what I'm seeing is that nobody is really, except for Suzanne. I appreciate that. Suzanne is the only one who would prefer that we're doing it now. The others are more leaning toward being indifferent about how we do it or not really doing it now. So here's what I'm going to do, is I'm going to show you the two documents and tell you what the goal is and check in with you a little bit about also how we might be able to go about this process. So we've had our ideas for what we might do. And, if you think, hey, there's another idea how we could do this, let us know. All right. I'm flexible. Yeah, thank you. All right. So the first document that I wanted to share with you is an initial draft of a glossary. And this is not the quote unquote officially approved glossary. It's actually our internal place in the committee to first of all figure out what are the kind of terms and concepts that we are all wrestling with. So here is this document. This is sitting in a glossary folder on our committee drive, but it's also sitting in today's meeting folder. I just pulled that into that. And just to show you what's in here. So this is like a glossary, but a little bit more extended than some normal glossaries. We made this list of different kind of terms here that we think are relevant and have been coming up at least sometimes or maybe coming up in the future. So we have 3 tables in here. One's for really our committee, the assessment and accountability terms. Then if you scroll through that, there is another table for the vibrant learning experiences terms, because we want to share that with them informally. We've already done that, but we want to share that with them and say, are there any particular terms that, you want to highlight here for the work that we are doing? And then there's also a table, for the policy committee. Like what's ESSA, what's ESEA, and some other, what's NCLB, and some other terms that they can eventually add. And then we started to also at the end put in some glossaries from the field. Because of course, glossaries, there's many that exist. Some of them a bit stronger and more comprehensive than others, but so we thought it would be valuable to also point out some that are really good. So this is a starting list here of about 5 glossaries that we have found. So how about we'll do a little compromise. Here's the compromise for you. I would love for you all to spend 5 minutes to do just the following. Read through this document and read through the terms that are currently listed on the left. So things like accountability index, accountability indicator, ATSI, what a badge is, balanced assessment system, we talked about that today, design principles, we talked about that. And just read through that list and see whether there's any terms or concepts that you feel like we should really at least try to wrestle with defining and illustrating, ideally, eventually. So this is just the terms on the left. And if there's anything that's missing, you can just go into the last row, right click, add a row below, and add a new term on the left-hand side. Or, you know, if that's somehow awkward, you can just put them in under this table in a list. Okay, and feel free to do that with the other two tables as well. And then we'll revisit this and we'll come back in about, let me do it about, let's do, what is it, 24? So let's do 5 minutes, okay? So just take a look at that, just the terms on the left-hand side, see whether there's other terms that you'd like to have explained, pulled into, and so on and forth.
I may have missed it, but where is this at?
Oh, the document here. I'll put this right in. Let me just put it in the chat. Thank you for reminding me. It's in the folder for today's meeting, but I put it in the chat now, so you should all have access to that. Okay, so it's 5:30. Coming back here with you all. So I didn't see anybody writing anything. That could have multiple reasons, obviously. So Betty says, for example, I think the formative assessment definition is too vague to be helpful. So that's fine. So noted. So Betty, what I would say to you then is, can you propose amendments, additions, things like that? And that's always the challenge, right? With language in a glossary, it's like if you keep it too short, it's a bit abstract in general. If you be more specific or with examples, you make it longer. So Betty, I will ask you to maybe provide some additional thoughts on that. Does anybody else have any reactions to seeing those terms listed? My camera is off, that's right. Okay, thank you, Susan. Do you have any other suggestions about how we might get feedback from you, socialize this, and is this helpful to you? Is it not as helpful? We'll take anything. Don't be shy. First question, is this helpful? I'm going to make it simple. What about this is helpful? What could be done differently? Anybody have an opinion on that?
Well, I would say that I could imagine this being very helpful for people that are reading a report because they aren't going to understand some of this language. And we certainly don't want that to be the barrier to engaging in this work, is knowing the language. But I'm wondering if we have, you know, somewhere close to 12 pages of definitions, maybe we are using some of the wrong language. Maybe it's not friendly enough if we have to have such a big glossary, because we want to make this relevant for parents too, and like students, and you know, all the different stakeholders. Or who is this for, I guess?
Yeah, so this is a good point. So I would say we should be first and foremost thinking about the Cool Council, which does include obviously parents and community members, but it also includes people are the people that are on this call, right? And you're absolutely right. And I think there could be derivatives of this at different levels of complexity. So in this particular draft, we went a little bit with the extended language, right, for each one, where there's a little bit more words spent on each term, just to give it a little bit of deeper explanation, so to speak, which to some degree goes away in some of the other published glossaries that are shorter and have a longer list of terms. You'll see that there, obviously. But so we could, I think it would be valuable to think about different versions of this. You know, so like maybe a simpler version that is for parents and parents, also different parents. I also don't want to always say like every parent is the same, right? So for people who have maybe less of an educational, formal educational background, or less deeply embedded in the educational space and are thinking about this all the time, and also then there's people who are more, no matter what their role or position is, who are more deeply involved in this. Somebody just said something, Paul Leather. As we have discussed, local accountability in this work is more defined as, okay. So Paul, I'll take what you say here and I'll put that, I'll revise that in the document. Thank you. All right, so this tension, right? Like making sure that we're clear about what a version of a glossary, who the audience for a particular version of a glossary is for, and then maybe creating different translation of that. In terms of our committee, do you have a suggestion for how we might get feedback from other members who are not at this meeting, right? Because today we only have a few of you here, we have a broader. So we could send this out, obviously, in an email and say, like, look, like what we're doing now, we have a document, it's for these purposes. Do you mind reading through either just the terms or the definitions, provide comments, add things? Other ideas? I'll give you the alternative model. Maybe this helps. So the alternative model is something where you have the leadership of the different committees, for example, both the state leaders and the facilitators, cook this up. I think one of you had already asked this, people in other committees are doing this. This is the intention behind this, right? To get essentially say sort of like, we as a committee have started this. Is this valuable to you as well? Do you mind adding your terms? Can we sort of come and build up like a glossary that is our shared understanding across the committee? So that was just our starting point for this. And so the alternative is that sort of just a small number of people are doing that, creating something that feels like, quote unquote, initially complete in the first draft, and then you give it to everybody for just at that point for feedback. That's a little bit different than having the bottom-up version for the members, where the members build this out sort of along the way. Anybody have an opinion on that?
I wonder how this conversation interacts with the notion that Betty brought up in our discussion earlier about sort of a common understanding of the structures we're all working within. And so I don't know that a glossary is the best mechanism for this, but it sort of strikes me as like, when we come to a shared understanding about something like, you know, the state and federal requirements for indicators in a ESSA approved accountability system, similar that we did over the summer when Jennifer shared her presentation on that. You know, would the knowledge from that be best captured in this, if it's sort of a living document, and as we're learning over time, we're expanding, and would that help us sort of, I don't know if the word concretize is a word, I use it, add it to the glossary, but it would help make our knowledge more concrete and stable, especially since not everyone is at every meeting. And sort of maybe it's like, as we learn together, the work then gets folded into here and grows over
Right.
time. I like that. I don't know if that aligns with either alternatives.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
One of the things that I keep going back to is in our United We Learn Council binder that they gave us in December, it has a glossary in it. And I was expecting that it would be updated as we've gone along. So when I came to our April meeting, I was really hoping to see additions to that glossary because I used it. So, and I think that you might find that stakeholders, parents, students might also use it. I don't think it needs to be whatever the definition is the definition. I don't think that we need to try and write it in a certain way for certain people because people can go and look it up or ask other people questions. But it was valuable to me having not been in a district, not working in a district at this time. Because one of the big things was understanding what an L3 was. And so I think that I think it's important for us to have.
Yeah, who owns that document that was printed out and made in the folder? Karen, do you have that? Karen Dawn, I think you're on the call still.
I'm here.
Hello.
Hi. I'd have to look.
Yeah, do you mind looking and sharing that with us? Then we can indeed do a cross-referencing. So one of the things that, I think we can easily play with is to sort of, for example, take what's here, put it also alternatively in an Excel sheet and do 2 versions of each definition. Like a little bit more what we might want to call the extended definition, and we'll do like the short definition, the more sort of like lay person's definition, just to show the contrast, right? Not because one of them is better or not, different people process information differently. And by the way, for some people also glossaries are not helpful at all. They don't really look at them, and that's not the way they process ideas. And for other people, it's really helpful. So it's just really our way also of just sort of seeing like kind of like what resonates with different people. Paul, you just came off mute. You want to say something, I think?
I did, Andre, and maybe you said this earlier, but thought I'd just kind of raise it back up, which is,
okay,
feels to me like you really want to focus on this glossary because it's really kind of the first step in building the platform, right? You have to have common definitions for things that will end up going into the platform that will be based on the definition. Am I right about
yeah, I think that's one of the goals. The other is also that some of the questions around some of these terms like come up in other contexts as well. So like I've heard at least 5 times people say to me, I'm making 5 up, but roughly multiple times people say to me like, what do we mean by a system of systems, right? Like what is that? Like what is an accountability system? Like where's the boundary of that? Does it include efforts for school improvement? Does it not? Is it just the technocratic core? So if you then have a system of system, is it like, what does that mean? And so for us, I think the idea here was to say, if no one wrestles with this, right, like even trying to find language in general, then we can't even have a conversation about whether we disagree, then it's all just like floating around. So that was our goal. So, and you're right, it's partly for the systems bank, but it's also for some terms, at least, I think it's also more broad than that. Did that make you think of something else, Paul? Did you want to add something on that, or?
No, I'm just really trying to put it in the context of your discussion here, but thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, and it was, and maybe it was also something, we've been having these, I know Kathy said this earlier, so I think it was like, we've had for months, this came up that people would say like, we need to be clearer on terms that we are using this and that. So this is also not saying like, like we as the committee have the answer. It's just more like saying, we're going to start this and wrestle with this and try to do this across the committee and share that with everybody so people can take it apart. And that's, it's just a way to get essentially the process of sense making started, at least for us. and then to take the temperature and see how that works across the committees. Because I know that, you as a CIE, you have like a value-based buy-in for some of these terms, right? Like you already said that in the comments, and other organizations have as well. And I think maybe to the point, I think this is, Kathy, you said this earlier, to me, this idea of it doesn't have to be the one correct answer or the one correct way of saying it. It's also helpful to sort of sometimes capture the variability in what people mean with this. And there's some terms here that where we have explanations where we say things like, in the narrow sense, it typically means this, but in a broader sense, it can also mean that. And so this idea of sort of making sure to people that when they're talking to other people, you have to sort of like learn to see what your conversation partner, what perspective and stance they have. Are they talking about it narrowly or more broadly, in a single disciplinary way, or more cross-disciplinary, and all of that? So I want to say that quickly.
I
Cheryl,
like it a lot as well.
Who is
What?
that? I'm sorry, I don't know who that who said that. Sorry.
It's Erica. It's
Oh,
Erica.
hey, Erica. Okay.
Hi. I like it a lot, in part because even though I've been part of this from the beginning, it offered me some clarification on some of the terms that still kind of were confusing. And I'm just thinking about the fact that we're going to have new people coming on board throughout this process. And this just gives us a way to share that information in a way that'll benefit anybody new coming on, without having to go back and they're still going to need clarification, but it gives a starting point at least so that we can say, this is kind of what our thoughts were on this, and we can adapt it as we need to.
Okay, thanks for sharing that. And I think, we also have to be realistic, right? This notion that, really deep integrated sense making is not because you read a glossary entry, right? It's by reading a glossary, having conversations with colleagues, looking at examples, trying an idea out by acting upon it, by designing something or evaluating something, right? And through that process over time, I think we all get a much more differentiated understanding of what these terms mean, unless it's sort of a pure fact, like, oh, this is a law, for example, like here, I have this on the pages up. And so, so we'll play with this. So here's what we're going to do. In fact, I will take it up on me here to first of all put this in, maybe play with that Excel sheet representation of also simpler terms, or maybe add a column here. I'll play with that, and then we in our committee, we're going to look at this one more time together as well. And then Sarah will probably send you an email at some point, sort of saying like, hey, this is where we are. Take a look if you can within a few days or a week or so, and give us any additional comments. And then we'll move it in parallel along with the other committees. All right, so at least you've seen that we are trying to support like this sense making. I wanted to show you one other document. I'm going to take 4 more minutes just to share this. All right, so we often talk about entry points in our committee. Entry points for making sense and approaching a problem in a different way. And really, it's not about one way being often the right way. It's just about saying, like, if we started here and we work the problem, does this help us gain some new understandings and make progress? So this here is a document that Karen Perry and I had started recently. And this came out of a conversation that had to do with this, again, like, how do we design a systems bank and resource space? How do we think about this? And, she's wrestling with that in her committee. We're wrestling with that in our committee. And in this conversation that we had, we came to this place where we said, why don't we start identifying really powerful examples of that we've all seen and that I've already shared with people, and that represents something, like either a way to communicate information about assessment and accountability efforts or redesign efforts, or maybe it's a resource bank with examples, or maybe it's a data portal. And so this table is very simple. On the left, where it says web portal, that's just a hyperlink to different sites that reflect not just mediocre examples, but like what we would consider like really good examples of like a well-designed something, a well-designed web space, well-designed database, and so on and so forth. And then next to it is sort of like what kind of a thing this is. So it's either a website, it may be a data portal, which is typically about empirical quantitative information. It may be a resource portal that has, for example, curricula or resources and maybe even some assessment-based resources in it. There is this one software that somebody wanted to level up, which is really good for thinking about what transcripts in the future might look like. There is also a glossary that somebody recommended. So the point is, can we all look at some of these examples and peruse them a little bit and see what about these we like and what might KDE or Kentucky, the leadership, what might we consider adapting for our work. We did something a little bit like this when we started the systems design brainstorm, where at the beginning of the worksheet, I don't know whether you remember this, but there was that little task where we showed you the Canopy Bank and the internal KDE Bank and said, look at this and see what you like about that. So this is sort of an extension of that, where it goes beyond the Canopy database and we're looking at other things. So the task that we're not going to do now, but that again, we're also going to ask you to do afterwards, is probably something like this. And I'll say it out loud and you can tell me whether you have an alternative suggestion quickly. Would be to send out this document and ask every committee member to just pick one of these example areas. So either a website from a department, a data portal, a resource portal, or some tools that they would like to learn and think about, just one of these areas. And then add either a tool that they think is, or sorry, an example that they think is really, really powerful, add a row to the table and just say, you know, what this is an example of, or look at the examples here and fill out that column on the right, ideally, about like, hey, what's really worthwhile about this? What should be adopted? So just so that we, again, collaboratively try to sort of find really, really powerful and good examples. And again, not the mediocre ones. There's a lot of like in the middle, but really stuff that you think is top notch for some reason. How does that sound? Anybody have any comments on that? Any suggestions for quickly? So then Suzanne thinks it's doable, right? Especially if it's more narrow. Okay, listen, in the interest of time, we'll just try it out. Again, Polly will come through an email from Sarah. She and I can talk about, maybe I'll send out, but I think Sarah, you're probably more likely to send this out. So at least if past practices are sort of an example of the future, I think. And then we'll give you like maybe a week, you and everybody else who's not here today, to do this as well, along with a glossary, and we'll see whether we can make some progress on that. All right, thank you for listening and for engaging, and I'll give it back to Sarah.
Yes, thank you, Andre. Thank you guys. I know that's been a heavy lift for two different systems today. So kind of recapping our meeting here, we've been talking about for cross-committee share-outs. We discussed the committee update from our presentation, just kind of recapping our past year, what we can celebrate, what we've learned, and then what we're still grappling with. Like I said previously, I'll be sending that out in an email for the whole committee to preview prior to submission, final submission to KDE. We've looked at some system of systems prototyping with essential features and had a really good discussion about the feasibility of implementing that, what would be important, what is pertinent and non-negotiable in those kind of systems and getting some ideas rolling towards getting that vision. And then looked at glossary for the committee as a whole, but also for the council as a whole, to define what it is that we mean when we're talking about certain aspects of developing the system of systems. And as Paul pointed out, I agreed with him on this is an important step because it's allowing us to define a common vision as we're working towards building that for a goal, a moonshot goal for the whole council. Anything else that I should include in that? And then, I'm sorry, and then the systems bank up design update that Andres is going to send out in an email as well, so that we didn't have time to look at more in depth today. Jennifer's going to look ahead with us to the November meeting, and then we are going to adjourn for the afternoon.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everyone. As we move into November, it will be a full year that we have been a Kentucky United We Learn Council, that we've been working together as the Accelerating Innovation Committee. And we've got a lot has happened since we first started this endeavor a year ago. We first met each other just shortly after Thanksgiving last year. And so this upcoming meeting, we are going to take a look backwards and a look forward. We're going to get to meet our interim commissioner first and foremost, and get to meet Robin Kinney, a wonderful KDE Associate Commissioner, and she has been invited by the Kentucky Board of Education to be our interim commissioner until a new commissioner is found. So we get to meet her, and then we'll take a really critical look back as we have been working together over the last year. We've learned a lot of lessons. Sarah talked through some of those things that we've learned, and it's important for us to take a look back to see what's gone well and celebrate those things, because we've accomplished a lot together as a committee and as a council, and we want to celebrate those things that we've accomplished, but also take a critical look at how that our processes and our plans could be improved, because we learn as we move along and work together, we learn together. And so we'll take a look back so that as we move toward the future, then we become more effective, we can become more efficient at our processes and our work together. So we're going to take that look back. And so as we move forward, then we'll define, as we've mentioned earlier, that vision for Kentucky's educational future, and really think deeply and think critically about what that moonshot is really going to be, so that we can all have that collective vision moving forward as the three standing committees. So we'll look at that and develop a moonshot, and then we'll move into our council and actually our standing committee, and we'll talk through those as well. We'll look at the processes that we've had as a committee, and then we'll look at how that we can become efficient, effective, and engaging as a standing committee, so that we have all of our voices reflected in our meetings, and your good input in each of our meetings, and all the processes that in future documents that we create. So we're going to be together November, the 1st of November, the 2nd and 3rd, that Thursday and Friday of November. So we're looking forward to that and celebrating the past and designing the future.
Thank you, Jennifer. All right, thank you, everybody, for your participation this afternoon. Lots of good discussion, lots of things to consider. I look forward to hearing further feedback from you when we send out the update email. later this week to get feedback for our presentation to the council in November, and looking forward to seeing everybody in person next month. Y'all have a great afternoon. We'll talk to you later.